Try Camels yourself, the cigarette so many doctors enjoy.
You know, if you were to follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you'd find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose. In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
Okay, I'm outside the Marriott Convention Center. I believe the date is June 8th, 2025, and I'm going and look at robot toys, robot toy convention. No, I do not buy robot toys, but I feel like the people who do collect robot toys probably collect comic books. I think that is probably a fair assumption to make. So I'm gonna go in there and look at the exhibits, just look around. I have a list of comics: Micronauts, Shogun Warriors, maybe ROM, Star Wars, Bronze Age, Silver Age, sci-fi, that sort of thing. My son told me about a particular Megazord. He said the Saban era Power Rangers Megazord. I know what Saban era Megazord means. Wild Force, I didn't know that. That was the season that he wants, so the Megazord from Wild Force. Oh, and it's the video lecture about advertising. Yeah, sometimes these weird, goofy things don't go along with the topic, but yes, this one actually does relate to advertising. So JMS 494, the lecture on advertising from the textbook, while Arsenault goes around a robot toy convention in Burbank. Defining commercial speech. Okay, now this video lecture is about chapter 12, which has to do with advertising. And even defining what is commercial speech is difficult. I'm looking here at the textbook from 8th edition, page 588. Scholars generally define advertising or commercial speech as paid, mass-mediated attempts to persuade. That persuasion increasingly comes in digital forms, blah, blah, blah. And then there's some financial statistics here, which have certainly increased that, yeah, advertising is a huge part of the industry and generates billions and billions of dollars. And the courts have ruled that commercial speech does have some First Amendment protection if it is for a legal product. If it's for a legal product, First Amendment does cover commercial speech, not as much as political speech. Political speech gets the most type of coverage. And what else do we have here? Yeah, that's it. First Amendment protection for commercial speech. Bigelow v. Virginia is the case that's mentioned in the study guide, and you should be familiar at least with the gist of that. That is the court case that established, at least as far as right now, you know, Supreme Court sometimes do change things. Bigelow v. Virginia is the case here that's relevant to establishing some First Amendment protection for legal products, that is commercial speech. And the Central Hudson case, yeah, you should be familiar with Bigelow v. Virginia, and you should also be familiar with Central Hudson. But before I get into that, before I get into Central Hudson, I'll just jump back here for a moment and talk about the difficulty in defining speech. This is what we call a native ad. If you can see it behind me, I'm recording this. I can't see myself on the screen, but I guess you guys are seeing it over my left shoulder, right over there, right over there. This is an ad that appeared on the website allrecipes.com. This is an ad for Campbell's on allrecipes.com, and it's designed to look like the rest of the content around it. We see native ads in many, many different forms of media. And it's supposed to have a disclaimer. It's supposed to acknowledge that it's actually a paid placement, that it's a paid ad. But if you're in the kitchen cooking, maybe you're looking at something on your iPad while you're cooking. If you glance at this, you're going to think it's a recipe, part of allrecipes.com. And I can pretty much guarantee you that the recipes that are in that Campbell's recipe collection are going to suggest you use some Campbell's products. I think that's a pretty safe bet. So when we talk about native advertising, this is what we're talking about: ads that are designed to look like the content that comes around it.
So much. I like her. Yeah, better.
Central Hudson, hopefully, inshallah, as we say. I'm not covering up too much of the screen here. This is the test for the constitutionality of non-deceptive and legal advertising. Yeah, if it's deceptive, then there's some different rules, and if it's an illegal product, that also is something else entirely. But in the Central Hudson test, Supreme Court established that non-deceptive advertising for legal products and services is constitutional if it meets these three particular requirements over here. I think they're over here. Yeah, if it meets those requirements. They're in the lecture notes. I'm not going to read them, but just know Central Hudson and where it comes from. Okay. The Constitution does not protect deceptive advertising. Misleading commercial speech loses First Amendment protection. I feel like I've already said that. We already know that. That's well established. And ad regulation can be justified if it has a tendency or potential to mislead consumers. What is deceptive and what is not deceptive? You know, like with many areas of the law, it's a gray area. I guess it has to do with the reasonable person. I guess that's what we're talking about, the reasonable person test, if a reasonable person would be misled. Now, who regulates advertising? Okay, when it comes to broadcast radio and television, we've already talked about the FCC, Federal Communications Commission. Now we have the FTC, Federal Trade Commission. They can do different things if people are found to have been in violation, either being deceptive or unfairly deceptive. And there can be something called corrective advertising, where a company, this has to be, I would imagine, very, very embarrassing, has to come out and actually put out ads that say, hey, the stuff we told you before was misleading. Listerine had to do that. Listerine mouthwash. I believe the claims were that it cured sore throat or prevented you from getting a sore throat. Listerine, if you're taking notes, write down Listerine. There was also a fairly recent, like maybe in 2023, recording this in June of 2025. In 2023, it was RJ Reynolds Tobacco Company had to come out with some ads and signage that clearly stated, yes, tobacco advertising, we misled kids, we tried to hook kids, we misled people about the dangers of nicotine, which I imagine has to be incredibly embarrassing for RJ Reynolds. I've seen this signage in my local grocery store, Keels, so in the corner of Jackson and Navajo. And when I saw that, I was like, there's a big sign that says RJ Reynolds, and they're clearly acknowledging that they misled children. So yes, that can be an extreme punishment if you have unfairly deceived consumers. Oh, he did like this. Okay, that zombie army is his, huh?
That one I created.
The zombie army you did?
Yeah, I did that one. I had the figures, these two figures, and then the skulls.
Okay.
I don't know what to do with them.
Now, when it comes to disclosures, okay, I want to mention this because I think many of y'all are probably interested in becoming social media influencers. I'm going to hold my thoughts as to whether or not I think that is a reputable or good career goal to have. I will keep my mouth shut, but I just know that many of y'all are interested in that. If you're doing anything like that, if you're doing any kind of like product placement, paid product placement, if you get paid money to do a blog or a podcast or an Instagram feed or TV show or whatever, you are supposed to disclose that you've been paid by this company or paid to promote this product. I don't think many people do this, okay? I don't think many people do this. I have this pamphlet, or actually a PDF that I got from the FTC. I assume it's supposed to be printed as a pamphlet. Maybe I'll drop in some images right here. I don't think people are doing this. I think people are, either they don't know that they're supposed to do it or they're just being sleazy, but I don't think many people do this. But I'm just letting you know that you should do this. And if you find yourself in that position where someone gives you money to promote their product, you should acknowledge it. You don't just like pretend that, oh, I just happen to love this particular brand of toothpaste. Now, the FCC does have some role here when it comes to advertising. We talked about the FCC in the video lecture for Chapter 9. One of the big regulations is there's no paid advertising on public TV stations or on public radio, okay? Public TV stations or public radio are not supposed to accept commercials. And the definition of a commercial here relates to something, they call it like a direct sell. You're calling a direct call of action. Come down this Saturday buy this car for this amount of money. You can do something on public stations called underwriting, where they say, this program is brought to you by Ed's Used Cars. Now, we know Ed's Used Cars is selling cars, but as long as that doesn't say, come on down this Saturday, we've got a vehicle worth this much, that is considered a commercial. Otherwise, it's considered underwriting. So yeah, the FCC does limit advertising on public radio and TV stations. There are also regulations against offensive broadcast and advertising, but the standards as to what's offensive and what's not offensive changes. I was listening very recently to a radio station from Southern Louisiana. I listen to a lot of Cajun radio stations, and KBON, one of the hosts was doing a promotion for a company called Bougie Bologna. That's the name of the company, Bougie Bologna. And their tagline was, and I'm going to say this for the sake of the video lecture, no buttholes. That was what the guy said on the radio. He said, Bougie Bologna, come on, eat our sausage, no buttholes, which made me laugh. And then when I later saw the DJ, I said, why am I not hearing this ad anymore? And he said, oh, the sponsor stopped paying us.
100% butthole free, not like me. This one's growing up, but this one's not. Because it doesn't have no butthole. 100% butthole free.
But anyway, in another time and place, no buttholes would have been not acceptable on the radio, but apparently you can say that now. Okay, now I'm going to talk about advertising to children and how advertising to children blends in with some other issues. And first off, I'm going to talk about this. There was a cartoon character called Joe Camel to promote Camel cigarettes, and we don't have Joe Camel anymore because it was seen as being too close to promoting a product to children, including cigarettes. Children are a susceptible group. There are special rules regarding them. We've discussed that in relation to other areas of media law, but especially when it comes to advertising, that we try to keep ads away from children, because the idea is that the belief is that they can't tell the difference between the ad and the stuff around the ad, which is why we don't have Joe Camel anymore. We're going to do a little break. I think it's back to the toy convention, back to the robot toy convention. And then we're going to talk about toys after that.
The heel is covering literally waist down from you. So if I shoot at you and I hit your legs, I don't do any damage at all. Now. Okay,
now here, this is the point where you finally understand why the hell Arsenault put video of a robot toy convention in with the video lecture for chapter 12. Okay, changing FTC rules on advertising to children can affect TV content. Okay, the important words are kind of, the nutshell is behind me on the screen. Okay, changing rules about commercials in kids' cartoons in the 1980s encouraged creation of shows which were thinly disguised commercials for toys. Okay, and if that's a big mouthful, I'm going to play a clip from a podcast. The podcast is called Stuff You Should Know, and the two hosts talk about these changing FTC rules about advertising in the 1980s and how that affected and led to the creation of some commercials and cartoons that blended commercials and cartoons, including one for G.I. Joe.
And none of this would have ever happened had it not been for Ronald Reagan.
That's right.
And that sounds weird, but here's the story. So in the late 70s, there was a lot of concern about kids and advertising, about advertising to children. So the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, got a task force together, and they said, should we ban or regulate this marketing to children? They put together 6,000 pages of testimony from the oral testimony, 60,000 pages of expert testimony from all these experts on child psychology and health and nutrition, because it had to do with, food and sugary candies and stuff like that too. And the conclusion across the board was that young children they are cognitively unable to understand the intent of selling ads. They can't distinguish that from reality.
Right. Like if you dress up a cartoon as an ad, the kid he just thinks it's a cartoon, or she does.
Exactly. Or if the ad is a cartoon.
Right.
Rather than the kid doesn't know. They just think, I'm still watching cartoons on my TV.
My brain hasn't made that switch, but man, could I go for some Smurf cereal.
Exactly. So it was a big deal at the time. So there were all these recommendations basically on how to regulate and restrict advertising that they basically said was unfair and deceptive to kids. For older kids, they said they can tell the difference, but maybe we should have warnings on the ads and disclosures saying that this is a commercial message.
Right.
And so what happens when you do this in America? The private sector said, no. I want to be able to sell as much sugary garbage to kids as I want. You can't restrict
free trade
in business.
Yep.
And so we're going to raise a record at the time, $16 million to lobby against this.
And they were helped out in no small part by getting the right guy into the White House.
Right. So in 1980, one of the first things Ronald Reagan did was he appointed a new chairman of the Federal Trade Commission. And this was a move that basically said, you know what, there's going to be no regulation whatsoever. Got to leave these markets free. You can do whatever you want. And that is basically how all of these cartoons were born.
Right.
G.I. Joe, Transformers, Smurfs, Care Bears,
Rainbow Bright, Strawberry Shortcake.
Yeah, you name it. It basically became marketing and selling things, and cartoons became one and the same finally.
Yeah, and one of the other things that definitely helped G.I. Joe too was the I don't know if it was formal or informal, but there was basically a ban on warlike cartoons and warlike toys.
Yes.
That was brought back under the same ease of restrictions by the FTC. So that I think the percentage of warlike toys that was sold in the early 80s went up like 350% from one year over the other.
Yeah.
From like 1983 to 84, I think. Whereas before it was like, no, we don't. G.I. Joe's an adventurer, remember? It's like, no, G.I. Joe's going to cut Cobra's head right off.
So that's in 1980. That's one of the first big things Reagan did when he got into office.
Okay, I used to have a version of this lecture where I went through all these different categories: tobacco, gambling, alcohol, prescription drugs, guns. It's all in the textbook. Take a look at the textbook. There's probably going to be a question or two on the exam about one of these areas. Not a hard question, but just skim the textbook when it comes to tobacco, gambling, alcohol, prescription drugs, and guns. Because these are all, products people have different feelings about. Maybe they're legal in some areas, not legal in other areas. So when it comes to advertising, you have to be especially careful about these kinds of things. This relates to this interesting issue of cannabis, right? Whoever came up with the euphemism of dispensary for the weed shops, kudos to you. Whoever came up with that, that's a nice example of framing there. I'm not going to the weed shop. I'm going to the dispensary to get my medicine. Art supplies. That's another good euphemism. Reggae tickets. That one is barely even a euphemism. If someone wants to sell you reggae tickets, you know what they're selling you. Anyway, okay, I digress. Daily Aztec, student newspaper. A couple years ago, they did this 420 issue, which was all about cannabis. This was the cover of the Daily Aztec. I was a journalism professor here at San Diego State when this came out, and this caused some great debate within journalism faculty meeting. At that time, the School of JMS didn't have any official connection with the Daily Aztec. We do now, but at the time, we had no connection to the Daily Aztec. And we are a state university that gets some federal funds. Cannabis is illegal at the federal level, but it's legal at the state level. Can the Daily Aztec accept ads for cannabis dispensaries? It's kind of a shifting area. I think the general consensus came down of no. Maybe technically they could at the time. Technically they could, but it was just frowned upon, because of this whole issue of federal money for the Cal State system and for San Diego State. And that, there's federal student loans and all this kind of stuff that it's just bad form. Let's not get Uncle Sam and the White House mad at us. Let's just not do it. But yeah, I just kind of I thought it was most amusing. And I guarantee some of my senior colleagues at that time, at that meeting, probably didn't know what 420 meant. you know, and not that I explained it to them. I don't even know what it means either. I don't know what it means either. I've never heard of such things. Okay, now I've got just one more slide here, one more points. Ad campaigns that step into social issues present this gray area. We've discussed, or I mentioned, that political speech gets the most level of protection. Political speech gets the most level of protection. Commercial speech gets some level of protection, especially if it's for a legal product. But what about these ads that cross a line? Like a Pepsi ad that's promoting diversity, like a Pepsi ad that's in support of Black Lives Matter. Is that a political statement, or is an ad for Pepsi? And wouldn't the world be a better place if we all just drank Pepsi? And wouldn't race relations be better if we all drank Pepsi? Or all these ads that promote Pride products during Pride Month, suddenly now you have rainbow toothpaste to promote LGBTQ issues, but they also want you to buy the toothpaste. I don't know what the exact answer is here, but just know that ads that cross that line could be confusing for the courts to debate. And then also you have this issue of puffery and advertising, if legal, if it does not imply a factual claim. Okay. Puffery and advertising is legal if it does not imply a factual claim. For example, when I was in England many years ago, there was a company that was selling potato chips. They called them crisps. They speak English totally incorrectly over in England. They have completely messed up our beautiful American language, but they're selling crisps. And the promotion was perhaps the greatest crisp you've ever eaten. I thought that was so very British and so very polite. Perhaps the greatest crisp you've ever eaten. That's not a factual claim. It doesn't say this crisp has 0 calories. This crisp will help you lose weight. This crisp, will help you grow hair. It doesn't say anything like that. It just says perhaps the greatest crisp you've ever eaten. It also strikes me as very funny because an American ad for a potato chip, they're chips, they're not crisps. An ad for a potato chip would be the greatest in the world, the best you've ever eaten. Like we tend to be a little bombastic, and Europeans do make fun of us for being a little overly excited and over exaggerated and that sort of thing. And maybe sometimes that is warranted. Okay, that's it. There's a lot of information in the textbook, especially the stuff on alcohol, tobacco, gambling, all that stuff. Just skim that part of the textbook. Bigelow v. Virginia, you need to know. Central Hudson test, you need to know. Yeah, and there may be some other stuff on the exam, but those are the biggies. All right, and now you've answered all the questions. I'm going to show you the comic books that I found at that robot toy convention. Yeah, I was right. Geeky people who are into collecting robot toys. I mean, what kind of person collects robot toys? Can you imagine a geeky grown man who would collect robot toys? I mean, can you imagine that? Comic books are normal, okay? I did find some comic books, and I'll show you that. And that's it for this video lecture. Success, far more than I anticipated. I spent a little bit of money, but not that much really. And then look, I got this great Jimmy Olsen. Jimmy Olsen comic books are great. I got a few Jimmy Olsen, but I think everything I paid today was kind of worth it just to get these 2 weirdo ones. First RoboCop, Blade Runner, because science fiction, you got to get the Blade Runner 1 and 2. Daredevil, just because this is an old Daredevil. Not the superhero Daredevil, but I figured I should have at least one. That's a pretty old comic. Strange Adventures. Oh, I got a lot more weird stuff at Jonah Hex in there. Yeah, did much better than I thought I would.